It's actually an astonishing repudiation of StandupIndia, StartupIndia, DigitalIndia, MakeInIndia, and God knows how many more of Prime Minister Modi's pet schemes. Just over the last month, 2,000 Indian startups have received notices from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, MCA, asking them to justify the premium at which they have raised equity funds, or else face harsh penalties and taxes. This has reopened and sprinkled fresh salt on old wounds. It's actually a second whammy for the same crime, because 2 years ago, the Income Tax Department had issued similar notices, slapped taxes, and begun prosecution under the dreaded angel tax provisions. And this time, MCA has expanded the probe beyond angel investors to include private equity and venture capital investments made during the later and more mature phases of a company's growth. You know, frankly, this so-called angel tax is an outrageous levy which places the power to value startups in the hands of, what can I call them, clueless inspectors. When even the most successful global professionals from the worlds of private equity and venture capital, these experts, get valuations right less than once in 10 times. You know, because valuations, like beauty, always lie in the eyes of the beholder. Let me give you a hypothetical but realistic example. Imagine if 5 investors, each wanting to buy a 50% stake in Flipkart, had valued the company at 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, 10 billion and $15 billion in 2012, when Flipkart was in its very early stages and was losing a lot of money. Now, each person's different valuation call would have depended on his or her relative risk appetite, their benchmarks on return on equity, their time horizon of invested capital, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 40 years, their understanding of the e-commerce business, the specialist understanding of that space, their bullishness on India's economy, their role in the company, that is, whether he or she was a pure financial investor or a strategic one who would have liked to stay with the company over decades, etc., etc., etc. Now, each person or institution would have given different weights to these individual factors and arrived at any number of different valuations. And note this, each would have been right, because Flipkart was eventually sold 6 years later for $20 billion in 2018. But hold on, under India's angel tax provisions, even the taxman must estimate or validate the valuation. And since the taxman is not an expert, as I've already called him a sort of a clueless inspector, and since Flipkart was losing hundreds of millions of dollars every year in 2012, perhaps the taxman would have given a rather poor and miserly valuation. Let's say $0.5 billion, $500 million, based on some outdated concept of net asset value or some such pure current accounting number without understanding and allowing for the future growth of the company. Now hold your breath. If the taxman had indeed made a valuation estimate of $500 million, Flipkart and its investors would have been forced to pay the following taxes: $200 million for the $1 billion valuation guy, $600 million for the $2 billion investor, $1 billion for the $3 billion chap, $3.8 billion for the $10 billion man, and $5.8 billion for the person who, or lady or investor who would have aggressively bid $15 billion for a 50% stake in Flipkart. And I've put this estimate at about taxation rate of about 40%. And these taxes would have been slapped even before a penny of cash gains were realized by the incoming investor. Without realizing even a penny of cash, you had to dole out billions of dollars in cash taxes. Do you seriously think any of our hypothetical investors, these 5 people that we've just laid out for you, would have put money under such a tax regime where they were being coerced to pay cash taxes on unrealized, uncertain profits? So dear Prime Minister Modi, I've just run out of words to describe how destructive. Frankly, this is a textbook example of what is often called tax terrorism. These provisions are just so destructive. Please help Digital India, Startup India, Stand Up India, and WhatNotIndia by scrapping this outrageous levy immediately.